foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to spend some time just a little bit giving you an overview of what is going to take place this week. Of course, we have the New York primary tomorrow, and that's going to be significant. So we're going to spend some time talking about that for just a minute. Also, of course, today have the Supreme Court decision coming down, or at least the oral arguments, and then a decision coming down on the issue of immigration. So we're going to get into that as well. And we are scheduled to have Dan Allender with us, if we can connect up with him. The second hour, we'll have Dr. Kathy Koch with us as we talk about her new book, 8 Great Smarts. So lots of things to cover today. And at any point, if you'd like to join the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. Well, last week was a lull before the storm, and that is we did not have any primaries, either for Republicans or Democrats. Of course, on Tuesday, we have the New York primary. And if you look at the Republican side, 92 delegates at stake. It is quite possible that Donald Trump will win all of those. And if indeed that is the case, then everything moves on 7 days later to a number of primaries, kind of on the East Coast primarily: Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island. 163 delegates at stake. But as we have mentioned before, when you talk about, say, Pennsylvania, even if, say, Donald Trump wins there, or Ted Cruz or whoever, most of those delegates are unbound. And so this is why it is going to be, I think, a little more difficult for Donald Trump to get the requisite 1237 delegates in order to win on the first ballot. But a lot of it will depend on what happens over the next couple of weeks. You would assume that certainly when you come to places like Indiana, Nebraska, West Virginia, which are the ones that take place in the early part of May, that Ted Cruz would do better there. You got 54 delegates at stake in Indiana, 64 in the particular ones in Nebraska and West Virginia, 33 and 31. But still, is it possible for Donald Trump to win on the first ballot? If he does, then all of the speculation that we've had on this program, and you have probably heard some of this as well, will go on to another day, but nevertheless, we'll see how that plays out. And so if you would like to join the conversation about this, we certainly will give you that opportunity, 1-800-351-1212. And if you look at the delegate counts, you can see that still Ted Cruz is behind by about 200. He has picked up quite a number in Colorado. Just recently picked up some in Wyoming. Wait till they get to West Virginia, which are sort of convoluted as well. This is why you've been hearing Donald Trump making a lot of noise about the fact that this is a process that is not competitive. It's a process that is rigged against him. Actually, it was a process that was rigged so that Jeb Bush would get the nomination easily, and that did not turn out. And, of course, part of it has to do with nothing to do at all with rigging. It has everything to do with the fact that you've got 50 different states and a few other islands as well, because you have the Marianas and you have Puerto Rico and you have some others that are part of the delegate process as well. And each individual state makes their decision. Now, what the Republican Party did was say that you have to have either a primary or a caucus. So what you sort of did in Colorado is had sort of a semi-caucus that led to a convention, because they've always wanted to do a convention. Of course, you've also had something similar like that in Wyoming. And so as a result, each particular state has some idiosyncrasies about it. Some of those are winner take all, Florida being a very good example of that, because even though Donald Trump did not win 100% of all of the votes, he won all 100% of the 99 delegates there, which, by the way, are pledged to the third ballot. So Ted Cruz, John Kasich have no chance of picking up any of those delegates on the first ballot, the second ballot, or even the third ballot. So you can see that in some cases this is actually in the favor of Donald Trump. But as we see so often, when you've seen this in basketball games, when the refs make a mistake, but it's in the favor of your team, you think the refs are doing fine. But the moment the refs make a mistake that helps the other team, then you talk about how terrible the refs were. Likewise, you have the same kind of comment here. Donald Trump has benefited in a number of states because of the rules, but now the rules in a few cases have worked against him, and now he's complained about them. And again, we can come back and have a discussion as to whether or not we should change the rules, whether this is the best way to nominate an individual. Those are all very, very important questions, and if you'd like to join us on that, we'll certainly take some of your phone calls. Let me also mention on the Democratic side that Bernie Sanders is within a few hundred delegates of Hillary Clinton, and there you need 2383. Now, the argument that's always made is it doesn't make any difference because at the moment, the best numbers I have are when you come to the super delegates, Hillary Clinton has 469, Bernie Sanders has 31. But the argument has always been made that if Bernie Sanders continues to do well, perhaps some of those superdelegates would change their mind, but we'll see how this plays out. Of course, New York supposedly is one where both of those candidates could do well. Hillary Clinton was a senior senator, well, I guess you say she junior senator at that time from New York, but then also Bernie Sanders has been a member of Congress for those many years in that region. He is, of course, a senator from Vermont, senior senator there, but he's also originally from Brooklyn. So you would think both of them might do well. And as it plays out over these next 2 weeks, because you have the New York, Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, they're both competing with some of the same ideology, some of the same constituency, and so we'll see if it makes any difference. But the assumption has always been that from the beginning, because so many of those super delegates were actually for Hillary Clinton, there's really no chance for him to win. So we'll spend some time maybe a little bit later talking about that, but that's one of those issues I wanted to put on the table. But another one, which maybe I could get to after the break, has to do with the Supreme Court oral arguments today. Let me just set it up, and then after the break, we'll get into it in a little bit more detail. Today, the oral arguments were heard for an extended period of time, by the way, 90 minutes, which is a little unusual. And it has to do with this immigration case that indeed affected a lot of individuals because it's known as DACA. And this would actually allow the president, who, after issuing the order unilaterally, would allow as many as 5 million illegal aliens to remain in the United States without any fear of deportation. So really, that's kind of one of the issues. And sadly, the mainstream press is really focused on that issue. How will that affect immigration? It's a very good question, but the bigger question, and the one which will really be decided by the court, and the one that was really argued today before the court, was whether or not the president could issue an executive order of this magnitude that bypasses the legislative process of Congress. Well, interestingly enough, those type of executive orders have been around for some time. The president so far has issued more than 200. We're getting up to about 250 different executive orders. Now, some of them were pretty small. They're kind of procedural kind of issues. Some of them were major, with the EPA, for example, and of course this one with the issue of immigration and affecting the Department of Homeland Security. So when we come back from the break, what I want to talk about is the remarkable change that has taken place on the part of these individuals who up until now have not really fussed at all about the president's executive orders. But today, if you go to USA Today, the editors of USA Today really argue that it would be a mistake for the Supreme Court to allow the president to do this, and actually argue that the Supreme Court should declare what the president done is unconstitutional. We'll come back and explain more about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Pastor Ray Johnston has a new book out that talks about how the church has become like the culture. He illustrates this by describing the 7 decades that have changed everything. We talked about these remarkable changes recently on my radio program. The 1950s were a time when America lost its innocence. Rock music was born. Teenagers were liberated from their parents by cars. Every home got a television set.
The 1960s were a time when America lost authority. America was on the eve of destruction, with protest about civil rights in the Vietnam War. It was a decade of drug use, Woodstock, and the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert Kennedy. The 1970s were a time when Americans lost love. It became the me decade after the disillusionment that took place in the 1960s. In the 1980s, Americans lost values as people got preoccupied with glamour, fashion, wealth, and media. The movie Wall Street may have summarized the decade with the phrase, greed is good. Then in the 1990s, Americans lost faith with the jarring images that occurred during that time. The 2000s were a time when Americans lost security. It began with a concern over Y2K, but moved from a scare to a real fear when terror struck on September 11th, 2001. And the 2010s seemed to be a time when Americans lost hope. They weathered the Great Recession, but did not believe that the future would be better than the past. Of course, Christian faith has the answers to these challenges. We can find innocence in the forgiveness of God, love in the love of God, values in the Word of God, faith in the promises of God, and hope in God Himself. The real question is whether we in the church will bring this message. That is why Ray Johnston titled his book, Jesus Called, He Wants His Church Back. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Quick once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Case before the Supreme Court today, in some respects, might sound like it's a little bit arcane and difficult to understand, but it really gets back to some of the comments that many of you have made, and that is how often can we allow a president to issue executive orders, whether they're good or bad? How often should we allow a president to essentially become the legislature if indeed the legislature doesn't act? And a lot of this has to do with this order that was given by the president known as DACA, the Deferred Action for Parents of Americans, came out in 2014. Now, just from a procedural point of view, let me just explain the fact that we right now have a split court. That is, you do not have 9 members, you have 8. So if the 4 liberals vote in favor of the president, I'm pretty sure that the 4 conservatives will vote against the president. I'm amazed that it would be 4-4 on this particular issue when even USA Today, even USA Today, saying this is unconstitutional and they should rule against it. But if it does end up as a 4-4 tie, then the lower court precedents will stand, and the lower courts have ruled against President Obama. This case came out of Texas, then it went to the Fifth Circuit Court, and now it's gone to the Supreme Court. So in many ways, it looks like this might actually be an action against the president. But there's a bigger issue at heart. And if I can just kind of explain this for just a minute, you have USA Today, which up until now has, as far as I can tell, never had a real problem with the president issuing these executive orders. But here you have now limit a president's power to remake immigration law. And so you say, well, what's the change? I mean, where were you when the president has issued over 200 different executive orders and nobody ever seemed to have a problem? Matter of fact, they even talk about the fact that they felt that this court ruled accurately on Obamacare. And so all sorts of actions that the president has taken certainly did not disturb the editors of USA Today. And so I would suggest to you that the answer to this sudden conversion at USA Today, and maybe an illustration of things to come, can be found in the third to the last paragraph. And I thought I'd just read it to you. Because they say the order's biggest flaw, however, is the precedent it would set by giving the president sweeping authority to interpret immigration laws virtually any way he or she feels fit. I thought, they're already planning on Hillary Clinton. But oh no. They said the same people who think Obama should have broad powers over immigration enforcement will feel a lot differently if a Republican wins the White House in November. Now I figured it out. You know, what's sauce for the Democratic goose is not sauce for the Republican gander. It's okay when we liked some of the actions by President Obama, so we just sort of turned a blind eye to his abuse of power, because after all, we liked the outcome. And frankly, we probably even like the outcome here, because early on in the editorial, they think that, keeping millions of undocumented immigrants in the state of legal limbo makes little sense. So they really think this might even have been a good idea. But then the next paragraph just drives it home. Quote, imagine what orders Ted Cruz or Donald Trump would issue if elected president. Trump has advocated mass deportations and a temporary ban of foreign Muslims entering the United States. In an interview on NBC News this year, Trump said he wouldn't hesitate to issue executive orders, noting that Obama has led the way with his actions. And so now we can begin to see the concern that they're having, and that is they're saying, what if Donald Trump or a Ted Cruz would have this kind of power? Well, we don't want that to happen. Now, to be fair, let's point out that Ted Cruz has really promised to return the government to kind of a constitutional foundation. He, if anything, would say, well, these were unconstitutional acts by the previous president, and I'm going to reverse those executive orders, and I'm not going to issue new ones. This was not something that is written into the Constitution. And so it's reasonable to assume that he's not really the danger. As much as some people might like Ted Cruz to come back and maybe use executive orders to get some things done that you couldn't push through a Republican Congress, the reality is he probably won't do that. On the other hand, Donald Trump already has made it very clear that, as he said, President Obama has paved the way. And so, again, recognize that we have a media that's really had no problem with how President Obama has used power. But now they've got a real problem if say, President Trump has those same kinds of powers. And so you can see that this is an issue that a lot of people have been writing about. Wall Street Journal also issued an editorial, and they reminded us that a while back when he was on Univision, President Obama insisted that he could not do what he has done in 2014. His argument there on Univision is, I'm a president, I'm not a king. He says, I can't do these things just by myself. We have a system of government that requires the Congress to work with the executive branch to make it happen. And of course, you can see that as you start looking at these issues, first of all, there have been various laws that have been passed by Congress, which the president and the executive branch have refused to actually implement. Now, the Congress doesn't say the executive shall faithfully execute what the Congress has proposed and passed. It says the executive shall execute Congress's laws faithfully according to the Constitution and according to the specific instructions of Congress. So first we saw how the president and his attorney general at that time, Eric Holder, said, we're no longer going to abide by, for example, the Defense of Marriage Act. So there will be certain things that Congress passed, but even though I'm the president, and even though we have an executive branch, I'm going to tell them not to actually enforce those laws. Then you have the reverse of that, in which some laws are actually being implemented right now without any congressional authority whatsoever. Probably the best example that I could come up with would probably be the EPA and some of the things that have actually been done there, although certainly there's a great column out today by Robert Knight, which I'll read in just a few minutes if we have some time, going into all the various details. But when you have, for example, the Environmental Protection Agency regulating carbon emissions, even after the Democratic-controlled Congress in the early years of President Obama's presidency explicitly rejected cap and trade, you see that is not necessarily what was intended by the framers of the Constitution, and certainly not is what is constitutional, even ruled by the Supreme Court. But nevertheless, we find ourselves in a situation right now where all of a sudden we're hearing from today, USA Today, and some people are speculating that this is now the beginning of maybe a change, maybe starting to maybe beat the drums in the other direction, saying, you know, maybe this president went a little bit too far. And it would have been fine if they ended there. But as I just pointed out a minute ago, as you read the column, their concern isn't so much what this president is going to do. After all, talk about lame duck. He has a few more months in the White House, and that is it. So they're more concerned about what the next president would do. They do use the word her, so maybe they're thinking a little bit of Hillary Clinton. But the reality is they devote an entire whole paragraph to what horrors would say a Donald Trump do now that indeed President Barack Obama has led the way with his actions and allowed presidents to make executive orders and allowed presidents to direct the executive branch in ways that are completely unprecedented in history and certainly are unconstitutional. So I'd love to get your comments about this. This is an issue that I think we're going to hear a lot about, but it's going to come in dribs and drabs. As you watch the news tonight, if you do, or if you go to websites, it's all going to be about how this particular DACA order, Deferred Action for Parents of Americans, would actually be beneficial to the 5 million who are kind of in legal limbo right now. And as important as that is, there is a much bigger constitutional issue, and that is, will we allow a president to have that level of authority? And if the Supreme Court decides to rule in favor of that, after all, you only have to have Justice Kennedy agree with the liberals, and all of a sudden this becomes a precedent. It's not just a precedent for Barack Obama. It's a precedent for the next president. And that could be a Hillary Clinton. That could be a Bernie Sanders. That could be a Ted Cruz, or the one that USA Today seems to fear the most is a President Trump, who would have no hesitation at all of using the same kind of powers that we have allowed this president, President Obama, to have, and to use those in an entirely different direction. So let's open up the phones. Last half hour, we're going to give you a chance to join the conversation today. We can talk about the campaign and how it has gone so far. Maybe you believe that Donald Trump should be elected on that first ballot. Some of you think maybe there should be an attempt to move to a second ballot, which would give Ted Cruz an opportunity. Some of you might want to talk about whether or not it's been fair for Bernie Sanders to win so many primaries and caucuses and still behind in the delegate count. And I'd love to hear some of you talk about what about the constitutional issues of allowing the president this unilateral authority. So if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Is it just me, or does this year's election seem more contentious than ever? Even Christians are divided between which candidate to support, but one thing we must agree upon is the need to pray together. Each and every one of us must be on our knees asking God's mercy. Who is the right one to name the next Supreme Court justice, or 2 or 3? Honestly, I don't know, but God does. And we must petition him to act. Point of View has created its own campaign in the midst of the presidential campaign, Pray, Organize, Vote. We want to remind you of things to pray about. We want to help you educate fellow believers and get them out to vote. Sign up today at pointofview.net. Click on the banner, Pray, Organize, and Vote. The future of America is at stake, and God's people are called to be good stewards of our votes. After you sign up, look at the bottom right corner for the red box that says Donate. Your gift will educate and motivate Christians during this critical time. Don't put it off. Visit now, pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, let's open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to some of those calls in just a minute. Focusing for just a minute on this issue of DACA, the Deferred Action for Parents of Americans, and this would affect as many as 5 million, but I want to move beyond just for a minute before we take some phone calls, just that issue, which was argued before the Supreme Court, and the broader issue today about how we are seeing so much more power being actually diverted to the executive branch. And Robert Knight's been on the program with us many times. Matter of fact, I'll have him back again just because this column is really good. Says that President Barack Obama has about 9 months left as president, and his administration is working overtime to abuse current regulatory machinery and create new rules that will transform America. Politico, for example, reported in January that nearly 4,000 regulations are squirming their way through the federal bureaucracy in the last year of President Obama's presidency, many costing industry more than $100 million in a mad dash by the White House to push through government actions affecting everyone from furnaces to gun sales to Guantanamo. Now, again, these are all very significant actions. I'll mention just a few, and then let me take a phone call, and we'll get into some more. You have the Equal Opportunity Commission right now that has provided and prepared a new form that will require businesses to actually come up with 3,300 data points about employees instead of the current 140. You might say, why would they want to know so much about each one of the employees in your business? Well, the answer is, as Robert Knight points out, is to create statistics that left-wing interest groups representing feminists and various minorities can use to sue over alleged discrimination. He says it's no coincidence that trial lawyers donate heavily to the Democratic Party. Then you have the Paycheck Fairness Act, which was first introduced in 1997, which would give federal bureaucrats vast new powers to micromanage workplaces in terms of some of the gender equality issues I mentioned. And just a few minutes ago, I mentioned, of course, the issue of the Environmental Protection Agency, where even when you had a Democratic president, President Barack Obama, a Democratic Congress run by Harry Reid in the Senate and also in the House of Representatives, and you nevertheless had a situation in which even the Democratic-controlled Congress rejected the idea of cap-and-trade legislation. So instead, that was actually implemented by executive order. So you can see that we have so many issues that are now moving to the executive branch. And in just a minute, I'm going to talk about a few more. But let me take some phone calls just to keep the conversation going here. So we'll head out first to Georgia on the Good News Network. Luce, thank you for calling today. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Thank you so much. First, I want to tell you I agree with you that we need to keep pressing. I want you to know that I am Hispanic, a full court judge. I still practice law and have done a lot of research with my husband, who's also an attorney, worked at the Georgia Court of Appeals as a clerk, a law clerk, which is that's all you do is research law. And after doing heavy-duty research, I do want to stress to our readers, especially our Christian readers, to really press not into opinions, but into facts. A lot of us are falling into the opinions with this election and not searching our facts. And I just want everybody to know that you have to be a natural-born citizen, and Cruz is not. He grew up for 5 years, his formative years, in Canada. I just think that's so important because a lot of us don't know that. His father is Cuban. His mother has residency and citizenship in Canada and continues. He just gave his up in 2014, which I can't understand that. Being from Colombia, I immediately wanted to become an American citizen as soon as I knew the difference. It's just a lot of things that we have to really look into. You know, I do believe that there's an establishment, and, you know, with the Goldman Sachs Bank backing him up and his wife Heidi working for them, we have to be aware of these things. We want to get out of this establishment. And so I actually voted for Ben Carson. I know he's no longer a candidate. I'm very sad about that. But he does endorse Trump, and he does his homework. That's a neurosurgeon. He's not a sloppy person. He does his homework. I've done my homework. My husband has done our homework, and we 100% support Trump. And I think that we have a lot of founded research. If you'd like for me to send it to you, I would. I don't watch TV. All of my research has been done legwork with my husband and I digging through transcripts and all the way through the 1800s with the constitutional intentions of our forefathers. That is what I have to say.
Well, very good. Obviously, that's a vote for Donald Trump. What about this issue, though, of since you know so much about the Constitution, Donald Trump saying, well, look, actually, President Obama's led the way. He's opened the door for the president to be able to do things that the framers would have never expected a president to do. Do you think that's something that Donald Trump, if he becomes the next president, should actually follow, or should he try to reverse course?
I believe that Donald Trump is a very intelligent person, and what he will do is he will hire the people that do the best job. That's why he's such a successful businessman, to help him make these decisions. I don't believe he'll just do something just blanket. He will do whatever will make this country stronger and greater and better. So he's not just going to do anything that Obama does. He's the one that called him on his birth certificate, that fake birth certificate that we never saw, by the way, never saw his college transcripts, and nor can we see cruises. They're all closed records. I've tried everything I know to do to get them. He will not allow them. Why? You should be open record if you're going to be running our country. If you're going to be the president of the United States, you need to open everything up and let us see it, and let us make our own informed decision. And being that I am an immigrant, I know. Now, Trump is very intelligent. He's going to talk to people like all the Ben Carsons, all the highest level, politicians that understand these issues and that don't have, these banks and people supporting them and have to pay dues to them, that are not bought, that are free thinkers, that are constitutionalists, that will make it happen. I am 100% confident that Trump will manage it that way. That's why he's a successful businessman. He doesn't play. He just goes for for what is right and what is just. He's not just going to go for whatever, especially nothing Obama did. He doesn't honor anything Obama did. Well, I don't believe he's just going to fall into that trap. Now, he will.
I do have my questions about that. I mean, I think he'll do what he thinks is right, but I don't know that he'll always do what is constitutional. And that comment where he said led the way, USA Today is a little bit concerned because, after all, if you're really pragmatic, and if that's one thing that certainly Donald Trump is, you're going to say, look, if the previous president got to do it, why shouldn't I be able to do it? And if you could declare these actions by President Obama constitutional, then I think they're constitutional. And of course, that's where we get off track. But that's not a problem with Donald Trump as much as it's a problem with the Supreme Court. But I appreciate your comments, Luce. A lot of what you were saying was more about Donald Trump than our issue at stake. So let me just get back to it for a few more minutes, and then I'll take some more phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. And that is, you have this issue that we're going to hear a lot more about, and that is the Paycheck Fairness Bill. Interestingly enough, a while back, Christina Hoff Sommers, who's been on the program with us, said that the Paycheck Fairness Bill would set women against men, empower trial lawyers and activists, perpetuate falsehoods about the status of women in the workplace, and create havoc in a precarious job market. It's a 1970s-style gender war feminism, unquote. Well, those are some points that she has made. And as you look through some of these others, Luce mentioned these banks, and that's an interesting thing as well, because now you have as well the Justice Department extracting billions from large banks over government-instigated mortgage crisis that led to the Great Recession. Again, I'm quoting from Robert Knight. He said this past week, Goldman Sachs agreed to pay the government $5.1 billion to settle a claim that the financial giant sold packages of bad loans. It was the fifth award bagged by the Obama-created Residential Mortgage-Backed Securities Working Group, which already nailed J.P. Morgan Chase for $13 billion, Bank of America for $16 billion, Citibank for $7 billion, and Morgan Stanley for $3 billion. Now, Robert Knight, I think, points out there's no shortage of corporate greed, and some bad actors took advantage of a bad situation. No doubt about that. If you've ever watched the movie or read the book, The Big Short, you say, where are all the people that should have gone to jail for some of that? But he said absent from those reports is any clue that Democratic engineered government pressure forced banks to give loans to people who couldn't pay them back, thus creating a mountain of bad debt. And so the legislatures who concocted the toxic Community Reinvestment Act of 1977 and those who defended Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac before the crash, read Barney Frank, have skipped away scot-free while the administration hangs total blame on the banks. This reinforces the Democratic talking point blaming the 1% for the last miserable 7 years of a wheezing economy. Well, we can see a lot more that is happening, and we can even get into the desire to begin to prosecute individuals that disagree with global warming. But a lot of this comes simply from what I would have to say is a runaway executive branch, and a lot of the question that might be resolved will be resolved in part by this decision that comes down from the oral arguments issued today before the Supreme Court. Let's come back and take some more phone calls. We'll do that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to New Hampshire, WSEW. Carol, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi. I guess my question is for anybody, for everybody. You hear about what Obama is doing, the decisions that he's making that he shouldn't be making, and it's like, what is the worst thing that he could do that somebody would eventually say, okay, stop it, you can't do this anymore? You know, I can only think of the worst thing I can think of is to kill somebody. And would they actually do something about it, or just shake their heads and say, "Oh well, he made another bad decision." Yeah, how long is this going to go on for, and what could we do about it?
Well, and I used to say some of that even in the 1990s, when you had the impeachment proceedings for Bill Clinton at the time. And again, for some of our younger audience, they only maybe read about it in a history book. But even at the time, I thought, okay, how many more things would Bill Clinton have to do before somebody would say, no, those are grounds for removing him from office, because anybody else who was engaged in that level of perjury would be removed from office. If you look at what has been taking place right now, even with Hillary Clinton's email server, we know that individuals who have been involved with a whole lot less, General Petraeus, for example, have been punished a whole lot more, and so far we haven't even seen an indictment. And again, the question you're asking about Barack Obama, it's the same question I'm asking as well. At what point would somebody simply draw a line? And part of the reason is that usually when somebody has crossed a line, eventually people in their own party get with them and say, Mr. President, it's enough. And the best example of that happened in the 1970s when the Republican leadership went across the Washington, D.C. area to President Nixon and said, Mr. President, it is time for you to resign because, you are destroying the country, you're destroying the party and all of the rest. And so oftentimes when that happens to a Republican president or a Republican senator, I can point out all sorts of examples of that as well, they step down. But when it happens with a Democratic senator or a Democratic president, they usually close ranks. And so in some respects, that's the case. And I would add one more issue. I think anybody that would really take on President Obama would immediately be called racist and trying to once again open up the race wars and all sorts of other issues. So there's maybe a secondary issue, but the lack of spine and the willingness to allow this president to do things that previous presidents would never have considered doing, I think is just very troubling for me, to put it mildly. So I appreciate you bringing it up.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's, if we can, take another phone call. We'll go out to California. I guess we'll have to get just a minute to process that one. While we're doing so, let me just mention that this is another issue I wanted to put on the table while we're talking about this is the issue of the Internal Revenue Service. You've got to remember that what we've had here is that the IRS was actually targeting Tea Party groups and other conservative groups before and after the 2010 election, and then it blocked all sorts of inquiry. You might remember, for example, that there was a woman by the name of Lois Lerner, and they wanted to get some more information. Well, it turns out that 24,000 of Lois Lerner's emails were destroyed. You have the current president and head of the IRS that some people have wanted to impeach because, again, he has failed to comply with some of the requirements from the congressional investigation. And now you are being told, for example, that there are about 10,000 of the 16,000 documents that Congress has actually requested that have never been turned over by the IRS. So you can see that I can mention organization after organization, bureaucracy after bureaucracy, and it isn't just President Obama, but it's set a tone which has said now that he can issue an executive order that affects the Department of Homeland Security. He can issue an executive order that affects the EPA. He can allow the IRS to stonewall. He can allow the Justice Department to begin to extract, if you will, some kind of protection money, if you will, from some of these banks. And the examples go on and on and on, probably worth a commentary, which I'll probably write in the future. But let's just, before we run out of time in this hour, take another phone call. We'll head out to California and talk to Mary.
Hello. Thank you for taking my phone call. What I'm concerned about is I don't respect the ones that are running for president right now. None of them have served our country in the military.
That's a problem. It's not a difficulty if an individual has appreciation for the military. Ronald Reagan really never served in the military, but I would think that's the case. And sometimes people that served in the military didn't necessarily treat the military that well. Jimmy Carter served in the military. A lot of people thought that we really built down the military. But I've always had an argument, Mary, you probably will disagree with this, and most of our listeners will. I don't see why we couldn't have a requirement here in this country that's similar to what you have in Israel, and that is everybody to serve in the military, or if you couldn't in good conscience serve in the military, you serve in some kind of community service. It just seems to me that we would be a better nation if everybody had to give back to the country in one way or another, either through military service or community service. And I think we'd be a lot better off if we did have individuals who had served in the military running for office. It didn't help, of course, John McCain, didn't help John Kerry either on the other side, but I do believe that individuals that know a little bit more about the military are going to be a much better commander-in-chief. So I agree with you on that point.
And another thing I was concerned about is I don't respect those people, and I don't know how any other country can respect the ones that are running, because all they're doing is fighting like cats and dogs instead of telling us exactly how they're going to accomplish all these things that they want to accomplish for our country.
Very good point. Very good point.
That's all I have to say.
Well, you had some good things to say there. We're just about out of time, so let me just mention the second hour, Dr. Kathy Koch is going to be with us. We're going to be talking about her new book, which we've already posted a lot of information about, and was the subject of a commentary by our good friend John Stonestreet the other day at Breakpoint. But just before we do so, let me just mention that we have posted a couple of things that you might want to find on the website. The first is I take you through an interview that I did about a week ago with Pastor Ray Johnston. And in the early part of his book, he spent some time taking us through 7 decades. And the book is really a fascinating book. It's got this very engaging title, Jesus Called and He Wants His Church Back. But even if you don't read the book, that first chapter was really good, and I tried in a very short amount of time to summarize 7 decades. Lots of times you will have people ask, and maybe you've asked as well, how did we get to where we are? And he really takes us through in the 1950s where America lost its innocence, and then in the 1960s where America lost its authority. In the 1970s, in a sense, this is where we lost our love. In the 1980s, where Americans lost their values. 1990s, where Americans lost faith. In the 2000s, where Americans lost security, of course, 9/11. And then now the 2010s, in which we seem to have lost hope. And so if you haven't had a chance to get my commentaries, of course, we send it out every single day, and we encourage you, if you would like to receive it, to simply go there and sign up. You receive mine Monday through Friday, and then Penedextra does one. We send that out on Saturday, so you have some great material that you can read, pass it on to others, post on your Facebook account, whatever you might want to do. So we certainly encourage you to find that on the website. But again, I recognize as I went through the rather long list of individuals that still have not voted. I know some of you that live in Iowa or New Hampshire or South Carolina or Georgia or Texas, you go, well, we voted, yes, but there are a lot of people that have yet to vote. And I'm talking about those of you in New York tomorrow that will vote, and then Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Indiana, Nebraska, West Virginia, Oregon, Washington, California, Montana, New Jersey, New Mexico, and South Dakota before we finally are done. And so those of you that have not voted, I certainly encourage you to go to our Pray, Organize, and Vote material. Not only give you some information about who to vote for the president, but also all those other very important down ballot issues and races as well. So go to our website, pointofview.net, sign up for my commentary, get the Pray, Organize, and Vote material. We'll come back with Dr. Kathy Koch and learn about multiple intelligences. That coming up right after this.
Later this year, for the 58th time, America will choose a president. As a Christian, what are you doing to prepare for the election? Helping you cut through the major media spin is part of the mission of Point of View. We want to provide the best election resources, including a new website, Pray, Organize, Vote, encouraging people to intercede for the upcoming election, to help you get registered so you can exercise the stewardship of voting, to share things to help you get people involved and out to the polls. But to do all of that, we need you to vote right now with your support for Point of View. Show us that you're in this for the long haul as a citizen of heaven as well as the United States. Click Donate Now at the top of the page and give the most generous one-time gift you can at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. There is a lot of work to be done. Let's get to it together. Pointofview.net. and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
You're going to enjoy this hour, and I think you're really going to learn a great deal as we talk about multiple intelligences, especially the intelligence way in which your children perceive things and learn. And this is certainly going to be, I think, a very helpful hour, and I certainly do encourage you, if you would like to join the conversation, to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Kathy Koch has been on the program with us so many times, but let me introduce her once again, founder and president of Celebrate Kids. We have a link to Celebrate Kids there as well. We also have, of course, the blog link to drkathykoch.com. I can't even count the number of times in the last almost year that I have quoted from Screens and Teens, held it up many times, shown it to people, used it in slide presentations, and that is certainly an outstanding book as well. Holds a PhD in reading and educational psychology from Purdue University. My dad was a Boilermaker, so I always have a lot of fun with that as well. And this is the new book, 8 Great Smarts, Discover and Nurture Your Child's Intelligences. And Kathy, just always great to have you in the studio.
Well, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
This is a little different than some people might know, because some people say, well, I know my personalities. I might even know whether I'm a visual learner, an auditory learner, or a kinesthetic learner. But here you're talking about different kinds of intelligences. And that goes back to some of the work of Howard Gardner and some of them. Talk about that.
Exactly. Yeah, he was a psychologist who was just intrigued by people's different behaviors and why do people do well at some things and not at others. And he never intended educators to actually get a hold of it. It was more from a psychology standpoint. But of course, educators loved finding out that all children are smart, and we need to give them opportunities to prove that, of course. And so I'm so grateful to God, for inspiring me to dig in and for the insight that he's chosen to impart to me, that I can be here today to share it with others.
Yes, and sometimes when we develop our classrooms, I'm talking now for the teachers out there. We have teachers that listen, Sunday school teachers, and if you're a parent, you're really a teacher anyway.
Amen.
Oftentimes what happens is we use the way in which we learn to communicate to our children or our students. And so a lot of teachers tend to be, first of all, very visual. So they are visual learners, and you can see that by looking at their classrooms. They tend to be maybe logical or word smart, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. And they wonder why some of the other kids don't get it until they realize, once I tap into this is going to be revolutionary, not only for how I communicate to my kids or to my students, right?
Exactly, because it encourages the children. And once you're encouraged, you're motivated, you move from apathy to energy, you gain confidence that you're smart too. Because you know what, Kerby? Smart is a power word.
Yes.
Right? Everybody wants to believe they're smart.
Yeah.
And once children discover that they're smart too, and it's not just their brother or not just the kid in the front row, it changes them internally, and they're willing to invest. And when they invest, maybe the expectation goes up, which is appropriate, and then life is what it was supposed to be rather than a diminished perspective about oneself.
I might just mention the foreword is by our good friend John Stone Street, and he was sitting there just a few weeks ago, so we know him pretty well. And I also have posted his wonderful Breakpoint commentary. So not only did he endorse the book and have a foreword, of course it's endorsed by Jim Daly and just a who's who of all sorts of people, Dr. Tim Kimmel, and we can go through the long list of people. But I thought it was kind of fun to have an individual who we think of as kind of an academic guy a little bit, who is really taken over the mantle of Chuck Colson, nevertheless talking about his kids and his daughters and how he's taken some of the books, even your previous book, and used this in his own life and then in the life of raising his children.
Yeah, it's been so encouraging. And I think when people who are word and logic smart, what we call the school smarts, when they get a hold of this, it can be really challenging for them because it has to change their opinion of others that they've maybe dismissed. Now, I don't believe John ever did that, but I know of people who assume that they're the smart ones and other people just need to buck it up and work a little bit harder. That's not true.
Maybe even before you start the book, just as in the foreword there, he's talking about taking his daughters on trips. And you've met his daughters because he takes them with him. He's talking about going to Washington, D.C., and how one of his daughters went through the Smithsonian Museum. Couldn't get that word out today. And nevertheless, wasn't really all that involved until they had a chance to look at these specimens. And then others, for example, that are word smart, just talk the whole time. So he's learning a lot more about his children, and that's really what you intended in this book, so that we would be able to begin to figure out what our children, our grandchildren, or our students really need in terms of input and any kind of stimulus and encouragement, right?
Yeah, great point. You know, kids want to be known, and I think they feel safest with people who they believe know them and respect who they are. And so when we uncover this and discover the intelligences that God has chosen to give them more brain cells for, if I can put it that way, then not only does that lead to academic success, and if you're a homeschooling parent, maybe a better choice of curriculum and methodology that you use, but it also shows you what they might want to do in their spare time, how you might want to engage them in conversation on a Saturday if you're concerned about their heart, even how we can volunteer as a family, and certainly also the career applications, making sure that there's maybe a fit to the way their brain works and what they're going to do from 8 to 5 or whatever for the rest of their lives.
I might even mention, too, at the end of each chapter, you suggest a game that you play with them, and that was very creative, too, because some kids respond better to certain kind of games than others, and that tells you a little bit about their intelligences, too, doesn't it?
It does. We probably all have those horrible experiences where we thought we'd have this great game, and one child was just pouting the whole time because it didn't fit the way that they could perform. The same thing with books, right? Yeah. Have you ever chosen a book to read to grandchildren, and you're convinced they're both going to like it, and one kid thought it was just amazing, and one kid halfway through was just wishing you would stop because, again, it didn't tap into maybe the way that those kids were smart.
One other thing I wanted to talk about before we get into the 8 particular types of smarts, and that is nature and nurture. And you can get into that a little bit because obviously some of this has to do with who we are and then how it is nurtured. And a child, for example, let's take the worst example, that grows up where they're not encouraged by the parents, where there's a broken home, maybe where there's a lot of dysfunction. Some of that nurturing hasn't taken place, and so there's a real need to even kind of step in and work with that, right?
Oh, absolutely, Kerby. We believe at Celebrate Kids that all of it is God controlled, if you will, the nurture and the nature. There's the nature, the gene pool, you know, God's choice when we're wired together in our mother's wombs, and he decides, I'm going to give this person a lot of picture smart intelligence. I'm going to give this person a lot of self-smart brain cells. And then it's up to moms, dads, grandparents, loved ones, teachers to awaken those intelligences. And what we know is that the earlier they're awakened, the greater the likelihood there'll be a strength for a lifetime. So I have an adopted niece and a niece and nephew in the same family born to my brother and his wife. And the 3 children are very similar, even though Betsy's gene pool was totally different.
Yes.
But the similarities are there because Betsy was raised in the same environment that Katie and Andy were raised in. All of it really, really, really matters. And it's never too late. If somebody's listening and they're thinking, oh, you know, I've blown it. It's never too late. The brain is a muscle. It's elastic. It's never too late. Even adults will come up to me after my seminars and say, I think I'm smarter than I thought I was. And I love that.
Well, we use a term called neuroplasticity. The brains are a lot more plastic than we thought they were. And so when we come back, I'm encouraging you to take some notes. A number from 1 to 8, and we're going to talk about word smart and logic smart and picture smart and music smart and body smart and nature smart and people smart and self smart. And each one of those have lots of insights. And as you're going through this, you might say, I figured out what I am, or I figured out what my children are, or if you don't have children, you're a teacher. Everybody's a teacher in one way or another, sooner or later. What are the actual smart intelligences, if you will, of those kids that you teach? So we'll talk about all of that with Dr. Kathy Koch right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Pastor Ray Johnston has a new book out that talks about how the church has become like the culture. He illustrates this by describing the 7 decades that have changed everything. We talked about these remarkable changes recently on my radio program. The 1950s were a time when America lost its innocence. Rock music was born. Teenagers were liberated from their parents by cars. Every home got a television set. The 1960s were a time when America lost authority. America was on the eve of destruction, with protest about civil rights in the Vietnam War. It was a decade of drug use, Woodstock, and the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert Kennedy. The 1970s were a time when Americans lost love. It became the me decade after the disillusionment that took place in the 1960s. In the 1980s, Americans lost values as people got preoccupied with glamour, fashion, wealth, and media. The movie Wall Street may have summarized the decade with the phrase, greed is good. Then in the 1990s, Americans lost faith with the jarring images that occurred during that time. The 2000s were a time when Americans lost security. It began with a concern over Y2K, but moved from a scare to a real fear when terror struck on September 11th, 2001. And the 2010s seemed to be a time when Americans lost hope. They weathered the Great Recession, but did not believe that the future would be better than the past. Of course, Christian faith has the answers to these challenges. We can find innocence in the forgiveness of God, love in the love of God, values in the Word of God, faith in the promises of God, and hope in God Himself. The real question is whether we in the church will bring this message. That is why Ray Johnston titled his book, Jesus Called, He Wants His Church Back. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Such a privilege to have in studio with us today Dr. Kathy Koch. 8 Great Smarts. Discover and nurture your child's intelligences. Again, it is published by Moody. You can look for it in your local bookstore, but we also want you to go to Celebrate Kids, because that's where you can find it, and get all sorts of other resources, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But as people are listening, Kathy, let's bring one more thing to the table. We've talked about the educational aspect, even the emotional aspect. There's a spiritual aspect to this as well, isn't there?
There is, and I think there's a lot of takeaways there for parents and how they do family devotions, even the kinds of attributes of God that you might want to share with people. As an example, I'm very logic smart, so I want things to make sense, and I can get pretty angry quickly when I feel like they're not making sense. I can kind of debate and argue with God a bit if I'm not careful. When I was a child, I came to faith in Christ because I had a youth pastor who listened to all of my questions. And he said, Kathy, you're always going to have questions. That's how God made your mind. Do you know enough to believe yet? And then I had this aha experience right there in his office where, wow, faith for the logic smart person, I didn't know this back then in these words, but faith for the logic smart person is really hard.
Yes.
Right? Because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so you have to, what I say to kids sometimes is that I turned off my head, I turned on my heart. As in an act of obedience, I chose to believe. And then I turned my head back on. But the thing that I think is so interesting, Kerby, is I came to faith in Christ for God's wisdom, not really love. That wasn't my compelling motivation back then. I was shown that in Colossians 2:3, we learned that in Jesus is hidden all wisdom and knowledge. My pastor took the time to teach me and show me in his word that the Holy Spirit would be my teacher, so that after salvation, I would be able to interpret scripture more accurately than before. So it was the wisdom, and then the love followed. But when we know how people are smart, we can find the scripture, the passion, maybe our personal stories that are going to be most relevant that will draw them into that conversation.
Very good. Well, let's get people to number from 1 to 8. And the first one is word smart. I know a few women that are called Chatty Cathys. And I guess you were one of them, and I didn't know that, but I do know others that their father called them Chatty Cathy at a very young age. So I'm not surprised, I guess, that you have that. But they do use words, and they actually think by sometimes speaking out loud. But explain what that actually looks like.
Yeah, word smart people think with words. So we'll have conversations in our head that you actually don't know we're having. So it looks like we're listening to you, but we're really not. And that gets us into trouble. We tend to read, write, speak, and listen well and often. It's what we do academically. It's what we do in our spare time. And the only reason it's number 1 in the list is that it is the primary school smart. Because if you think about traditional schooling and even our churches, what do? We read, write, speak, and listen. And so children who have great qualities there and have been raised with dictionaries and thesauruses and all those kinds of things are going to find the academic pursuit to be more in line with who they are, and they'll find it to be a safer thing. But you know what, Kerby? How many of us know people who succeeded in school but are not succeeding in life?
Very true.
Right?
Yes.
So one of the things I really enjoy saying to people is that the purpose of school is not to create them ready for more school. The purpose of school is to get them ready for life. And sometimes one of the advantages of, or how would I say it, advantages of raising children to know that they have all 8 of these.
Right.
That's what allows them to succeed, not just in school, but in life.
But like you said, this is school smart. So the kids that are word smart, they do very well. And they're the ones that do well on the spelling bee. And they're the ones that are able to pick up a concept very quickly. And sometimes they either are visual or auditory learners. And so everything comes well to them. As we're going to see a little bit later in the program, you may not have done so well in school, but you're also very smart. But you don't have the kind of skills that the way our schools are structured are. And maybe we should think about different ways that we could structure at least a Sunday school class. Maybe not all of our listeners are teachers, but all of us in one way or another can structure our homes, our family devotions, and our Sunday school classes a little different, couldn't we?
Absolutely. And think about this, Kerby. If I'm a learner, let's say I'm an adult and I'm not a teacher, but I loved what you said, that all of us do interact and actually teach. But let's say that I'm listening as a learner and I'm going to an adult life group or Sunday school class, or I like to listen to sermons online. When I discover or radio, when I discover how I am smart, then I can take control over the way that I learn, the way that I study. So if I find out that I have different intelligences, I absorb the information differently, and I'll have better comprehension, retention, and application of the truth.
What about careers and relationships for people that are word smart? You talk about that.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You know, if we're word smart, maybe we have great friends who are also word smart, and we talk over each other, and we have these long dinners and lunches because we never run out of things to say. Maybe we also benefit from being in relationships with people not like us so that they help us raise up another intelligence that is weaker. And that's something I address in the book. Careers, talk radio, public speaking, like both of us, being an author, a teacher, politician, lawyer. It could, and again, the intelligences always work together. So for instance, and we're going to get to this, but if I'm word smart, people smart like I am, I actually like an audience. If I'm word smart, self smart, I don't need the audience, and I might be a researcher who's in a cubicle all day, reading and writing and then passing on that information to others who use it.
One other one I thought I'd mention, each one of these sections has a let's play, and so you're suggesting that maybe a word smart child would like to play categories, or maybe would be good at crossword puzzles and things like that, right?
Right, and certain apps on there, I'm concerned about how much technology is used.
Yes.
But certain apps will be relevant to kids and adults because of the way that they're smart. So Words with Friends is something that I know adults enjoy playing with each other, and those are the word smart people.
That's very good. So word smart, number 1. Number 2, logic smart. You've already said that you have that ability, and of course anybody who's read any of your books knows that's for the case. But how is a logic smart person manifesting themselves?
They tend to think with questions. And so if you have children and adults who are always asking why and how come, that's also logic smart. It can be irritating and really challenging at times because we might not know the answers. So then we help them look it up. We help them do the research. We have our pastor on speed dial and we have the child ask him. possibly. These are the kids who tend to enjoy math and science. Math does make sense. 2 + 2 is always 4. And science is something logic smart brains like because we like to discover truth. And so we can blow up chem labs if we're not, careful and self-disciplined.
Yes. Well, and that I think shows when you talk about what to play, Clue is one of the games they like, or Blocus or something like that. I mean, they tend to be kind of logical. But again, let's see if we can talk about maybe some of those relationships and some of the careers. That's a little different, isn't it?
The thing about relationships, for those of us who are logic smart, I kind of joke that I can figure out you have a problem before you know you have one. And if I'm not careful, I'll solve it for you. And what we need to be really careful of as logic smart people is that we love and we don't treat people like problems we're trying to solve, because that doesn't feel like love. So I think for logic smart people, sometimes, and for instance, here's another thing, small talk. Because I'm word smart and logic smart, I want to chat about things that matter.
Yes.
And so small talk can be really fatiguing for me, but I need to honor others because that's what the Holy Word tells us to do. It's not about me being comfortable in every moment. It's about me knowing who I'm with and honoring them. And so if they're smart in different ways, I need to actually shut down the logic a bit. I have friends that I call on the phone and I actually ask God to help me turn off the logic for a while and simply listen to love.
Yeah. Because again, they were just talking about just say get to the punchline, just I'm ready, and also solving that. If you have a man or a husband who's logic smart, trying to solve a problem that the wife is just word smart, just trying to explain my day. I'm not looking for you to solve any of the problems, and he wants to get to the punchline. That's where you get some tensions even in marriage too, don't you?
Absolutely. People come up to me all the time and say, "Oh, this is going to change the dynamic in our marriage," and praise God. And I didn't write my book for that. But if you read it with all the ears you have, if you will, or all the eyes you have, it can be really powerful.
I would think so. Again, 8 great smarts to discover and nurture your child's intelligences. And it's certainly available in the local bookstore. But let's see if we can talk about if they go to Celebrate Kids. There's all sorts of other resources in addition to this, aren't there?
We have a brand new poster that has the 8 listed, plus all the ways that you can awaken and nurture the intelligences. And we designed that for a homeschool mom's classroom, a Sunday school room, a teacher's room. There's a bookmark that reminds you to teach to all 8 smarts and help kids review with all 8 smarts. And then, of course, my other books and CDs and DVDs and things are there as well. So that'd be really cool. CelebrateKids.com.
And we have it on the website there. It's got a picture of the book and also has a link to your blog in case people wanted that. It has some of the videos so people can watch those videos as well. And as a matter of fact, one of the assignments I usually give people on the videos is to watch the video, then click the share button and put it maybe on your Facebook page or something, start a conversation, or maybe send that link to people that are maybe raising some kids, or maybe they're a teacher and they need to know about this. And this book is just full of great information. We've only covered 2, so that means we got to get 6 more in the next half hour, which I think we can do pretty easily since we're very logically oriented people. So we'll do that. CelebrateKids.com on the website. If you have trouble remembering that, there's no problem. Just simply go to pointofview.net. We have a picture of Dr. Kathy Koch up there. We have information about her book, and also I've posted a few other articles about it, but one in particular I would encourage you to read is the piece by John Stonestreet. He did a very good job a couple of days ago on Breakpoint talking about this book, and you might send that on to some people as well. Let's take a break. We'll come back and talk about the rest of those great smarts and multiple intelligences. All that coming up right after this.
Is it just me, or does this year's election seem more contentious than ever? Even Christians are divided between which candidate to support, but one thing we must agree upon is the need to pray together. Each and every one of us must be on our knees asking God's mercy. Who is the right one to name the next Supreme Court justice, or 2 or 3? Honestly, I don't know, but God does. And we must petition Him to act. Point of View has created its own campaign in the midst of the presidential campaign, Pray, Organize, Vote. We want to remind you of things to pray about. We want to help you educate fellow believers and get them out to vote. Sign up today at pointofview.net. Click on the banner, Pray, Organize, and Vote. The future of America is at stake, and God's people are called to be good stewards of our votes. After you sign up, look at the bottom right corner for the red box that says Donate. Your gift will educate and motivate Christians during this critical time. Don't put it off. Visit now, pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again in studio with us today, Dr. Kathy Koch, as we talk about 8 great smarts, discover and nurture your child's intelligences. And it is published by Moody Press. And we've already talked about a few of those. So if you are keeping track, number 1 was I'm word smart, I think with words. Number 2, I'm logic smart, I think with questions. Let's get to number 3. I am picture smart, I think with pictures. This, I would imagine, for most listeners is pretty new. So let's talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, these are adults and children who think with their eyes in pictures, so they're imaginative and creative internally. If I say octopus, they immediately see one, even though I didn't ask them to see it. They can't stop it from occurring. They can laugh at things that we don't know are funny because they put pictures together in their mind's eyes. They tend to enjoy history and fiction because they see the action, and that helps them also remember it. So the creative writing might be a strength for them because using rich adjectives and vivid verbs is something that they would naturally do because they're writing what they're seeing in the picture smart part of their mind.
Yeah, would they be good in drama or photography or some of the creative arts like that?
Excellent insight. Now, if they're body smart and picture smart, they build with clay.
Yeah.
If they're logic smart and picture smart, they might doodle geometric designs. It always shows up with the interaction of them. But I agree, drama, because they can see the action that they're about to portray. Absolutely. Creative arts, and again, the fiction and things like that. They might be landscape architects. They might be art teachers one day.
Yeah, so again, you talk about some of those. One of the things we always wanted to do is talk a little bit about what they could play. Pictionary certainly fits. That was the first one that came to mind, but you also have telestrations. I don't know about, or the telephone game, some of that. Tell us about that one.
That one is so much fun.
I've never played that or I haven't even heard of it.
Oh, so. I'm not very picture smart, but I love this game. You sit at a table with your family or friends and you draw a card, and you have to draw that phrase or that thing on a piece of paper and pass it to your neighbor who guesses what it is, puts a word on it, and you see if at the end it actually comes back. Like if you got the word canoe, did it come back as canoe? Or by the time it comes back to you, have they figured out that it's something totally not even that you would ride on water? And so you win a point if it comes back as canoe. Really, really fun. And what's cool is that you don't have to be totally picture smart. I'm not very much that. But I love the game because it's a hard game for everyone, even if you are terribly picture smart.
Fascinating.
Yeah, really fun.
Again, if you are saying, what kind of games do I play with my kids that they're going to really enjoy? There you go. So in addition to learning about all the different smarts and all the different intelligences, you're also learning how you can encourage them as well. Let's keep it moving because this train has to get to the end here. I am music smart, I think, in rhymes and rhythms and melodies and things like that. So what's a music smart? I guess that's pretty obvious, but talk about some of those issues.
Well, we might be the ones who sing in tune, or we might just sing for fun because it's interest and ability. We might play musical instruments. Kids who take piano lessons and thoroughly enjoy it and do very well and enter competitions and enjoy doing it all the way through adulthood are going to be more music smart than kids who play the piano to quit after 3 or 4 years. So singing, musical instruments, enjoying music. I'm actually concerned about a generation that might enjoy it too much. They idolize music. They got pods in their ears all the time. So I think we've got to be really careful. If kids are so music smart that that's all they do, it can dampen the success and the other intelligences.
Sure. And you wouldn't necessarily have to have music ability to be music smart, true?
Right, because it's interest and ability. So it might, now usually if there's a lot of interest, it'll spring forth into the ability category, but not necessarily. And it will peak and valley. Like I was super music smart as a child. University and the Boilermakers. Right now, music is a high interest of mine, but my ability has weakened because I don't take the time to still play the instruments that I used to play.
Very good. What about careers? Obviously, some people would naturally think music, but that's not necessarily the only possibility, is there?
What about audio production in a radio station or video games, and you're the ones that designs the sounds and the symptoms? Being in Hollywood, if you will, and being the one that, again, all the prop noises that are a part of that action. Again, music teaching, conducting, playing. Absolutely. There's many in the website or many in the book. And then we have a website that has a free download. Can I mention that?
Sure, please.
If you go to 8greatsmarts.com things, and there's a list of 50 careers per smart.
Outstanding.
And not only is that really good for but we all know underemployed adults or unemployed adults trying to figure out what to do next. And this can maybe spring some creative ideas that they haven't thought of before.
Very good. Music Smart, also some games to play, something like Cranium or Encore, certainly a couple. But let's pick out another one here, because I already see we might be getting some phone calls, so we might want to take those in the last segment if we can.
Okay.
I am Body Smart. I think with movement and touch. And those of you that read the preface or the foreword by John Stonestreet talks a little bit about that with his own daughter. So what would a body smart person look like?
Yeah, these are the ones who they may have trouble sitting still. They talk with their hands. They might always want something in their hands. They will think best when they're allowed to move. So if we say, sit down, put that down, look at me, they're actually not going to be able to do as well academically. They may study best with a clipboard, and they might learn best by skywriting the spelling words rather than just writing it on a small piece of paper. Again, the book is full of study strategy ideas. Career-wise, maybe truck drivers, again, anybody who's up in front of a crowd, drama, being a drummer versus a flute player, because drumming has much more of a physical application to it. These kids can often feel deficient and damaged. They may be labeled ADHD and they're not.
Yes.
They might actually be, but they may not be. And what they need is the self-discipline to honor the adult authority and not prevent other kids from learning by choosing to be still, even though when they get excited, they want to move and they want to touch more.
Interesting. So that's a good comment or two, maybe even a warning. Just because you see a child that is very active, that doesn't mean that they're ADHD. They may be, but it's not necessarily a diagnosis you want to jump to right away.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah, so again, some ideas. And again, Twister and playing tag, all those kinds of things fit into that category. Let's take another one just before I take another break. I am nature smart. I think with patterns. Now, again, nature smart would be certainly they love to go to zoos or they love museums and things like that, but it's the pattern idea. So explain that if you might.
Yeah, these are the people who can remember that bird is a blue bird, not a blue jay, because they remember where the blue goes on the body or the wing. They remember an elm tree isn't an oak tree because one has curved leaves and one doesn't. So that's the patterning. So they collect things, and they might actually use this ability for things like was and saw, 6 and 9, the reversing of B's and D's, which is why I want to say again, get out of the little box. It's not just nature smart. That's what Howard Gardner called it, and I totally get that and respect that. But we can take this ability to think with patterns and apply it to so many other things. The other thing that I think is so important, Kerby, is understanding that these kids will do better in earth science, biology, meteorology, and not necessarily general science and chemistry, because those are more word, picture, and logic intelligences. Geometry is a picture smart, logic smart math. So again, they always work together. And if kids say, I don't do science well, I like to say, then we haven't found the science yet you can do well. Maybe you're a nature smart kid and we need to plug into that.
How about careers and any kind of relationships issues that we might want to know with a nature smart kid?
Relationship, really good point. These are the kids who will talk to us better maybe outside. Going to a park and a park bench or swinging on the swing set with your 7-year-old and listening to the stories that come more naturally in the out of doors. Even going to a restaurant and sitting on the patio is going to be something a nature smart person is going to prefer rather than being in a dark room away from the windows.
Yeah.
Careers, again, anything outside is probably going to be something they're going to gravitate toward.
In terms of games, maybe not so many games, although you have some, was it Quirkle? And then also the Rock-On Geology game, some of those,
Yeah, going to a toy store that has educational coins, going to a teacher supply store and looking at the educational games is often going to you're going to find things there that you wouldn't see other places.
So again, we'll take a break, but when we come back, we'll finish off the few that we haven't talked about. And if you're taking some notes, we've been going through it pretty quickly, which is why you need to buy the book. But we've talked about the word smart. Those are ones that think with words. Logic smart, I think with questions. Picture smart, I think with pictures. I am music smart, I think with rhythms and melodies. Body smart, I think with movement and touch. And of course, the one we just mentioned, I am nature smart, I think with patterns. We'll come back and talk about people smart and self smart in just a minute. But give that website one last time if people want to get some of the download that goes along with this.
8greatsmarts.com. It also has free access. If you buy the book, there's a secret code that gives you access to an online assessment tool so you can determine which intelligences you and your children have the most of.
Well, again, all sorts of links that we are providing for you today. And if you, again, click on the picture of Dr. Kathy Koch, you will see that we have information about our website, Celebrate Kids. I've also posted, which I think you would really like to read, the piece by John Stonestreet and a couple other articles and videos and resources that are all available at our website, pointofview.net. 8 great smarts, discover and nurture your child's intelligences. It is endorsed by everybody from Jim Daly, president of Focus on the Family, to John Stonestreet, with, of course, Breakpoint and a variety of other individuals, many of whom have been on this program with us. Let's take a break. We'll finish off those smarts. And if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some calls if you want right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes as we talk about multiple intelligences, and we've talked about word smart and logic smart, picture smart, music smart, body smart, nature smart. 2 more, and that is I am people smart. I think with people. Talk about that, if you might.
When we are being people smart, we get our joy from telling what we know, and we know what we know when we share it and watch someone react to it.
Yes.
So, talk radio is just a great example where you and I are both people smart. We're sharing, we're interacting, we're using logic and words to do it, of course. Listeners who are people smart are probably talking out loud in their kitchens or in their cars as they're listening, because the people smart part of them, the word smart part of them are activated by all the insights that we're privileged to share.
Sure.
These are the kids who would rather do their homework at the kitchen table in the middle of the chaos than in a quiet bedroom down the hall. We get our energy from people. We think with people. I get a lot of thinking done, believe it or not, on airplanes.
Yes.
Even if I don't talk to people, there's something about the intellectual energy of being surrounded by people, which people who aren't people smart think that's just crazy, that even if you don't talk, it benefits. But can you relate to that? Or
Sure, I can. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
I've written whole books basically on airplanes. I can look at some of those books over there and recognize a lot of those were written on airplanes.
So there's energy for you too, just with the people. So we're in trouble in school for talking to people. You know, if you're word smart, you talk. You don't need an audience. If you're people smart, you talk, but you do need the audience. Yeah. The other thing that's so cool about being people smart, Kerby, is that we respond well to body language and facial feedback.
Right. They certainly
really
do.
Important for kids today because of texting and handheld devices. Their eyes are down. They're not interacting. They actually talk to their parents without looking up, and parents do the same thing to their kids, which is not healthy.
Screens and Teens. That's another great book. I have recommended that so much. I've probably increased the sales dramatically.
Oh, thank you so much. So I think of the 8, I like to say that I might prioritize this one above all the others because it's not about just academic success. It's about life success. And we want our kids to be able to look at people and know whether or not they're safe or unsafe. And if somebody looks sad or angry, does somebody look curious or confused? And if we can figure that out by looking, then we know how to respond. And that's called love and honor and devotion, and it's healthy.
Yes. Well, we're talking about counselors, pastors sometimes, people that really interact with people on a day-to-day basis. They don't respond to quiet rooms, they respond to people, right? And,
absolutely.
The idea of solitary confinement is the worst thing they can possibly imagine. So.
Yeah. And I think for parents and teachers, it's what allows you to know whether or not to step in or step away from a situation. It helps you motivate and not manipulate. It helps you read a crowd and know whether or not you should stay on the point you're making or move on because boredom has set in.
Sure.
So again, if I were reading a book for how do I help my kids become more self-disciplined, I might read the People Smart chapter first or second or third so that I can figure out how to read the look they're giving me so that I can enter in and help them be safe.
Very good. Some of the things I like to play, gestures. But again, if you're people smart and body smart, you would love charades, right?
Yes, good point.
Yeah, some of those. One more real quickly, because then we want to put some of these together. And that's the last one. I am self-smart. I think with reflection. And that's a little different kind of one that many people don't really understand. So let's get into that.
Yeah, I love that we have proof from Howard Gardner that this is an intelligence. It resides in the mind and the brain. And it's so important that we can think deeply. These are the kids who no question is easy because every question has to be thought through and they ponder and they go deep inside of themselves. They want the answer to feel right. They can actually feel stupid in school because they feel like they're thinking so slow. They love it when I tell them, no, you're smart. And that's why you're thinking so carefully. I think it's extremely important. We who are self-smart get our joy from knowing our knowing versus the people smart who get their joy from telling the knowing. I think if you're raising a self-smart child, she's always been this way, content to be alone and quiet, needing peace and privacy. If children all of a sudden need quiet, peace, privacy, and space, maybe something's happened and we need to investigate and look into that. But kids tell me all the time they resent the questions, are you okay? Why are you always alone? Don't you have more friends? Guess what? Self-smart people are pretty content without a whole bunch of people around them. They know they're knowing, and that's what gives them joy.
And I work at a think tank, which you know about, and we've had individuals that would, even for a radio program where I'm just looking for 5 3-minute commentaries, say, I got to read 5 books on the subject, I got to do all this research, and they would, we would put them behind their office, and I'd slide food under the door because they didn't, they didn't want any interaction. They wanted to get into it. But again, those are those deep thinkers that we certainly have benefited from all these years.
Great example of being word smart, logic smart, and self-smart together versus someone who's word smart, logic smart, and people smart would be the one that communicates the truth probably more readily than the other people.
Sure. Only have a few minutes left, but what about these last two? Because you've talked about how some of these work together or sometimes cause problems. So explain that if you
Yeah,
might.
I really appreciate you asking that question, Kerby, because I believe all 8 reside in the mind, and if they're awakened, we exhibit all 8 of these. People who have a lot of people smart and a lot of self-smart tell me that it's very internally confusing. They don't know who they are when they wake up, nor do we who live with them.
Sure.
Or you might go to a Friday night fellowship and the people smart part of you is most activated. So everybody knows you're in the room, you're greeting and meeting and you're celebrating, you're talking, you're interacting. And then next Friday night you need to go because you signed up to go and you're bringing your special fudge brownies. But something on the radio on the way to the church triggered the self-smart part of you, and that activated a deep, reflective, internal thinking process. So you walk into the room, you put the brownies down on the table, and you go and you take your place. And people come up to you, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. And 5 minutes later, they come back. Are you really okay? You can tell us the truth. And you're screaming inside, I'd be better if you'd leave me alone, because I'm still thinking. And so it's so valuable to have both of those, the ability to go deep and to know your thoughts, and then the confidence to be people smart and share them. Children who have this combination tell me, oh, Dr. Kathy, I thought I was sick.
Yeah.
I thought I was crazy, that I sometimes need to separate from my family, but I can't tell them why. I'm not angry. I love them, but I just needed my time alone. I believe that bipolar people sometimes aren't. I've had people in my audiences go, oh my goodness, that is so me. Now, bipolar is real, and it might be a diagnosis that results in medicine and all of that. But I wonder if some people are just self and people smart, and they need to learn the rhythm of that internal struggle.
I think as you begin to apply some of this, you might say maybe we've overdiagnosed ADHD, overdiagnosed bipolar, and some of that. Again, we don't want to minimize that, but at the same time, you might learn a little bit more about some of these smarts. We have only about a minute or two left, so I thought one more time I'd love to have you talk about some of the things that are at your website, which we have a link to here at pointofview.net. Of course, you can go to Celebrate Kids, and that is enough for anybody to actually find some of the links. But let's talk about what's available there.
Oh, thank you so much. CelebrateKids.com talks about the speaking I do. There's an ability to get a hold of us if you'd like to bring me into your community, which would be amazing. There's a shopping cart. There's additional information about the 8th grade smarts there, a nice list and a definition that you can find at CelebrateKids.com. My blog is my name, so Dr. Kathy Koch, KOCH.com. And I do blog about multiple intelligences almost every Wednesday. So there's hundreds of blogs there that people might prefer to look at as well. The book's website is 8thgradesmarts.com, where you can get the career list. Mm-hmm. You can also get the assessment of determining how your children are smart. And that you have availability if you buy the book. There's a secret code, and you can buy the book at any number of these websites we're mentioning, and that would just be fabulous. We're on Facebook and Twitter, and people will find us if they choose to, and it'd be really great to hang out together.
Well, again, it is always great to have you on the program.
Well, thank you, Kerby. I love being on your show. Your show is so significant. You never bore us. Your topics are always significant and always important for us to be living Christ-like in this confusing culture. So thank you for what you do.
Well, thank you. Just about out of time. Let me mention again, we have some of the links there that you can follow. And don't forget that we have some other books by Dr. Kathy Koch. Screens and Teens, I've mentioned that a few times. No More Perfect Kids, and a variety of others. How Am I Smart, which is one that kind of started some of this conversation. But this one today, 8 Great Smarts, Discover and Nurture Your Child's Intelligences. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
Is it just me, or does this year's election seem more contentious than ever? Even Christians are divided between which candidate to support, but one thing we must agree upon is the need to pray together. Each and every one of us must be on our knees asking God's mercy. Who is the right one to name the next Supreme Court justice, or 2 or 3? Honestly, I don't know, but God does. And we must petition Him to act. Point of View has created its own campaign in the midst of the presidential campaign, Pray, Organize, Vote. We want to remind you of things to pray about. We want to help you educate fellow believers and get them out to vote. Sign up today at pointofview.net. Click on the banner, Pray, Organize, and Vote. The future of America is at stake, and God's people are called to be good stewards of our votes. After you sign up, look at the bottom right corner for the red box that says Donate. Your gift will educate and motivate Christians during this critical time. Don't put it off. Visit now, pointofview.net.